Hey everyone, and welcome to a brand new video. Tonight we have 9 stories. I hope you all enjoy them. If you do, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps out the channel immensely. Subscribing if you're new is also very much appreciated as I post content just like this all of the time. Please be sure to check out my other channel if you are interested in hearing even more horror stories. I will have it linked in the pinned comment as well as the top link in the description. Anyway, enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. I think my wife cheated on me in college, but I'm afraid that's not the worst of it. I would appreciate some help not freaking out. I found it early on the 3rd day of the project I thought would take an afternoon, wedged tight between a yellowed flip book of baseball cards. Nothing but nickel and penny backs it would turn out, and a dry-rotted box of moth-hole linens. Probably more than the cards after a wash. I almost threw out the small plastic case along with the box. It wouldn't have even caught my eye if I wasn't so desperately looking for something to make the purchase of the storage unit worth it. Scanning everything. Not a CD case, a floppy disk weighted inside, piece of masking tape covering the front labeled FTA. I set it on top of the measly pile designated Keep, right on top of the rickety rocking chair. Wow, real treasure there, my wife Jane said, already wiping off the thin layer of sweat onto his sleeve. It didn't take long for these metal boxes to get hot in the Florida summer. Might have some clip art on there if you're really lucky. A fresh copy of Windows 95. That's how this stuff goes. You sort through all the junk until you find the one thing that pays for the auction by itself, I said, surveying the last bits of crap we had left to sort through. I love you, Bun, but you gotta realize there's a big difference between reality and reality television. She yelled as she threw down the box she was holding and started batting herself. A centipede worked through the handle hole and back into the void within. Jesus, you're definitely going through that one. It's some kind of game, I yelled from the office later that night. I managed to dig out the old floppy disk drive from the ancient computer left in the storage unit, and was amazed when I managed to hook it up to my laptop with a little creative adapter use. I waited to click the game.exe file and look through the only folder. A bunch of files without extensions, all with random strings of digits. More than seems like should fit on a single floppy disk, but I didn't actually remember how big they were. I just remember the Oregon Trail took 2. Great. Really hope it's worth the $500 you blew, Jane called from the kitchen. Her voice got raspy when she was tired. Because nothing else here is. All this jewelry's fake. Deciding an apology would just frustrate her more, I held my tongue as I clicked the XE, hoping whatever viruses there were too old to do any damage. I was instantly greeted by jarring music and a spinning aerial view of a campus. FTA/start. There were no other options. I clicked start. Like a stop-motion movie, the camera clicked down quickly down to the ground. The quality of the pictures was actually pretty good. The whole game seemed to just be a series of images taken at different angles, kind of like Google Street View. Huh. I said, trying to do some quick math in my head for how much space all these pictures will take on the drive. Must be a short game. The camera stopped moving as it centered on a walkway leading into a large building with an arched section showing a courtyard inside. I knew this building. It was the clock tower quad at the University of South Fork, my alma mater, on the other side of the country. Just as I was pondering the coincidence, white text flashed across the screen, jarring me with that beeping music again. Find the abomination. I typed all over the keyboard. finally ending the music and causing the text to fade as I figured out you controlled the camera with the numpad. Each step changed the photo to one a little bit more in that direction. Tap, 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 and I was walking down the path I took every Tuesday and Thursday to biology. A girl clutching books was walking towards me, a little further with each step, wearing that oh-so-popular of yesteryear combo of Ugg boots, puffy vest, and a jean skirt. I tried tapping backwards to see if she'd walk in reverse, but she continued forwards no matter the direction I moved. Something about that seemed wrong. I tapped my way to her, catching her quickly. The two-chipper tone was replaced with a gravelly roar, a bit like a toy with a low battery. A white line highlighted the girl as a question flashed above her. Abomination, ? /yes/no. Of course, I clicked yes. My stated mission was to find the abomination after all. The screen shook as the outline fully enveloped her, then the whole screen turned white. When the photo returned, a wah-wah sound accompanied the words. Try again. Find the abomination. The girl was lying on the walkway now, a thin line of blood coming from her mouth and one of her eyes. What was this game? I heard Jane's footsteps through the bedroom across the hall and checked the time. Almost midnight. I'd already blown the whole evening getting this game set up. My cursor covered over the X on the window before an idea struck me. I moved past the girl I had apparently killed and turned around. Sure enough, I saw the finger-felt dorm, ugly and blockish as it was a decade ago. I clicked forward, careful to not get close to any of the stutter-stepping students around me on their way to class. I got to the side entrance door, the one that required a keycard to get past. There was no option to open it, only rewarded with a staticky sound as I tried to walk into it. I tapped back and forth, letting time go forward slowly until the door finally opened. A young man, collar popped around his puka shells, highlighted white as the eerie sound returned. Abomination. Yes/no. I clicked no this time and the outline faded as the proto-douche continued on his way unharmed. I tapped through the open door and into the dorm building I lived in for most of 2 years. Again, just as I remembered it. This must have been a school project of some kind, made by a CS student, taking pictures throughout campus. Maybe it was to show off some kind of image comprehension technique. I walked across the common room to the stairwell door, and again had to pace in place while I waited for someone. A stressed-looking older student to open the door for me. I hoped the door to the 3rd floor would be propped open, as it always was when... I then realized that was stupid to expect because it was only while I was there that the door to the 3rd floor of dorms was indeed propped open. I could have told you the name of the book wedged between the door hinge without looking at it, but I tapped myself close anyway. The busted copy of Norton Anthology of American Literature, Volume D, wadded right where my roommate had crammed it. It was his little social experiment to see how long until someone removed it. The surprising answer? A year and a half. So all these pictures were taken while I was a student. What are the chances? The vibration of my phone on the desk shook me from my focus. I had been jaw clenched, leaned so far I was almost touching the computer screen. A text from Jane. Take the dog out before you go to bed, and don't spend all night on that thing. We're waking up early tomorrow. I sat down the phone and looked back to the strange window into the past. I tapped excitedly down the hallway to room 309 at the end of the corner turn. The door was closed. I checked all the keyboard keys, seeing if there was somehow a door open button I missed. There was not, so I began my now familiar back and forth shuffle to progress time as I waited for the door to open. Would I see a younger version of myself? Of course not, I realized. I would have remembered some creep running around taking pictures of me. The door opened and I backed up to see Jane, hair up in a messy ponytail. Just a girlfriend back then. It looked like she was wearing my hoodie, actually. I took a picture of the screen with my phone and sent it to her with the caption, "Do you remember this?" The picture, not the hoodie. But I could already hear her lightly snoring across the hall, so I set the phone down and returned to the game. It wasn't that hard to get around when you followed someone, because they opened all the doors for you. This was clearly the way the game was meant to be played. As I tapped along behind her, Jane turned away from the dorm and followed the sidewalk to the streets across from campus. More than one permanently installed beer pong table stood in front yards, more rug and astroturf than grass. She was trekking through the classy part of off-campus housing. She flipped open her pre-smartphone and started a call as she stepped onto the porch of one of the less run-down houses. A bearded guy answered. He looked vaguely familiar. She snapped the phone closed, smiling in that sly way of hers. As I made my way up the stairs, the first frozen pictures that greeted me was of them locked in an embrace, lips millimeters apart. One more tap and they were connected, kissing passionately. I stopped and rolled myself away from the keyboard. With a backdrop of tandem snores from Jane and Tanto now, who had apparently given up on me for that walk and gone to bed as well, I started my existential crisis. Somehow, whatever this game was, it had to be real. There's no way something would have all that real detail in it without actually being real pictures. But no one reacted to the camera, so the camera must be invisible or really small somehow. I finally realized what bothered me about the way people moved. In Google Street View, there is one picture for each spot you drive through, because the camera car went through that area only one time. This game doesn't work like that. There isn't just one picture for each spot. There's one every second because you can stand in any spot at any time, or follow someone around. If there were 10,000 different places to stand in the zone of the game, and there were probably more, I hadn't found the edge yet. I had already progressed time in this game about 2 hours, so that's 7,000 seconds. That would be 70 million pictures. The answer was obvious. It must work off a server. The floppy disk just has the software to grab the pictures from the internet. So, with that sorted, I closed my eyes and leaned back, letting my heart sink. This was real, however this game was made. And this really was my wife kissing some other guy. I looked back at the screen, irrationally hoping I wouldn't see them trying to swallow each other. Like maybe I missaw it somehow. There they were, kissing still, frozen and waiting for me to walk forward another second. I looked closer at the guy, and I don't think I really let myself believe until then. I did recognize him. He worked with Jane at the coffee shop in college. His name was Tucker, and always had a shit-eating grin when I stopped by, past punchable face and into hammerable, if that was a word. A sudden urge to close the game and try to purge all this from my mind struck me. I tapped forward, making sure to follow them before they closed the door behind them. He was already halfway through getting her, scratch that, my hoodie, over her head. She eagerly raised her hands to help him. I tapped forward again. The white outline surrounded him as the growling music started up. I plugged in my headphones and put them in. Abomination. Yes/no. Yes, dear game. Yes, please. The screen filled with white again and returned with Tucker smiling no more, laying face up, blood working down either side of his face. A small pool of it obscured one eye, the other staring up blindly. What confused me was Jane's face. Shirt half on, makeup smeared. She looked horrified, staring down at him. How had the game coded that? The game answered, "Try again. Find the abomination." I tapped closer and she was on the ground beside him, hands preparing to shake him. The white outline covered her now as well. I couldn't stand to see that look in her eyes. She really cared about this piece of crap. Didn't he comment something on her profile picture last week? My stomach sank further still. It had bothered me when I thought this was some college fling she never told me about, but I only now considered it might still be going on. We were going to have quite the talk in the morning, Jane and I. For now, a little catharsis. Abomination. Yes/no. Sorry, Jane. I whispered, pursing my lips as I pressed yes, feeling oddly ashamed, like when kid me forgot to feed my Tamagotchi. The white light came and went, and Jane laid face down over Tucker's chest, a single drop of blood on the carpet below her nose. The dog snoring got louder from the bedroom. Do dogs ever need CPAP machines? It didn't seem to bother Jane, at least. She was sleeping soundly now. Ding ding. A new sound greeted me. You win. You have wounded the abomination. Level 1 complete. The screen showed the flashing text as the image panned back on its own, up and up, through the roof and up further until the camera or drone or whatever was above the city again. The words faded and the original screen returned. FTA/start. I looked at the clock. A little past 1 a.m. I closed the game but didn't feel the least bit like sleeping, despite feeling ragged as I ever have. Eyes half closed from his nap, Tanto tumbled into the room in that clumsy German Shepherd way of his, eagerly displaying that universal tap-tap dance. Ready for that walk, boy? I had to focus on the simple things. Tomorrow would be a hard day. I closed the laptop and tossed on my jacket. The green light still glowed on the floppy disk drive. I unplugged it, and after a few seconds, it turned off with a click. I heard the ping of my wife's phone from her bedside table. I walked quietly across the hall, Tanto at my heels, and peeked in. The glow of the phone screen lit up the room, but Jane was still as stones, unstirred by the chirps. Part of me didn't want to snoop, but I already had the phone in my hands before I could stop myself. I got her password on the third try. She only had a few she used. I opened the notifications. 3 missed calls from a number that wasn't in her contacts. All in the past few minutes and 1 voicemail. I hit play before I could stop myself and quickly hammered the volume button down as a girl started loudly sobbing on the other end. "Hey, it's Tucker's sister. He's really hurt. He fell over and hit his head on the table. Now he's just laying there. I called 911, but they aren't here yet. Call me back. I'm freaking out. He's bleeding from his eye." The line clicked, and I brought the phone back down. As I stared, a text came through. "They said he's dead. Call me back." Another call chirped, and I silenced it, letting that last line of the voicemail roll in my head. I shined the camera to the Jane-shaped lump in the bed. I listened. The only sound was the whispered whines of Tanto beside me. "No," I said, surprising myself with how neutral my voice sounded. "Jane, wake up," I yelled. "Wake up." My feet felt pinned in place. 1 step closer and I could touch her, shake her awake. Unless she was dead. A black thought reminded me. She was still laying there, unmoving. No. It's just a fucking game. I backed up to the door and flicked the light on, slowly walking back towards her, looking for what I was afraid would be there. a single drop of blood on the pillow beneath her, dripping from her eye. I saw nothing. She yelled, pulling the blankets up to block the light. What is wrong with you? Oh, thank God, I said, almost losing my balance with a wave of relief that washed over me. When you didn't answer, I thought, I'm not that old, dummy. You're not getting rid of me anytime soon, she said, stretching as she sat up. Now, what's so important? Your phone was going off like crazy. I handed the phone to her after she finished rubbing her face. A bunch of missed calls. I watched awkwardly as she flicked through her phone and listened to the voicemail. I think a friend from college is in the hospital. I gotta take this. Sure. I said, stepping aside as she slipped on her house shoes and robe. Tanto followed after her, clearly giving up on me after I failed him a second time. I was left alone in the bedroom, staring at something that stopped my breathing with rising fear as one word repeated in my mind. There on her pillow was a small stain, a single circle. Not red, but darker, black as ink. Is this all a coincidence? Am I going crazy? Are you a special kind of thrill seeker? So utterly bored with reality that you dance with death just to get your kicks? If so, I have just a thing for you. This game, if you wish to call it that, is called Cracked Doors. Your average Joe wouldn't be caught dead playing this game, but you're no average Joe, are you? The rules are complicated as all hell, but I'll try my best to explain them anyways. Here are a couple ground rules you should follow before attempting to start the game. Ground Rule 1. The game must start and end while it's dark outside. The exact time is irrelevant, just as long as the sun isn't showing. The length of the game can range from anywhere between 1 to 3 hours, so it's best not to start right before dawn. Ground Rule number 2. Don't play this game if you are easily frightened or suffer from any anxiety. You want to keep your wits about you at all times if you want a chance at winning. Ground Rule 3. It's best to play this game in a room with as few doors as possible. Playing with only 1 or 2 doors is optimal, but there are cases of people winning the game with 3 and 4 doors. Windows do not count. Closets do. Ground Rule number 4. It's best to play in your home. While you technically could play this game in an office space or some random other building, it's best to play in a place where you won't be disturbed. Ground Rule number 5. Make sure all lights are off in your play space. The dim light of an electronic clock or some other small light source is fine, just as long as it's still dark. Ground Rule number 6. Do not leave at any time during the game. You've blocked off all of your exits, and you'd basically be walking straight into your demise if you attempted to leave. Ground Rule number 7. It's best if you're well rested when attempting the game. Trying to play while fighting off sleep will put you at a major disadvantage. Do not fall asleep. It's basically an automatic loss. Now that we got the ground rules out of the way, let's move on to how to start Cracked Doors. Once you've gotten all affairs in order, you're ready to play. To start off, you want to open all the doors in your play space slightly, just enough to fit your fingers through. You will then want to sit in the center of the room, make sure furniture is out of the way if need be, and say, "Come and get me," in a soft whisper a total of 3 times. This will summon your opponent. It's unclear what your opponent is. A ghost, a demon, a creature from another reality. Whatever it is, it's now in your presence. What you could potentially see on the other side of those doors will be replaced with dark, oppressive void. It will be completely pitch black beyond your doors. You may even smell a foul odor if you get close enough. There is a chance that your opponent will not wish to play with you. For whatever reason that may be, your doors will slam shut. Wait a few minutes and you should be safe to leave. Do not attempt the game again. It will remember you. The rules of the game are as follows. To win, you must survive until your opponent leaves. Your opponent will not leave until they have given up. You will know when the game is over when the void on the other side of the doors is gone. Over the course of the game, your doors will slowly start to open on their own. You must try and keep these doors at their original cracked positions for as long as you can. As the game progresses, the speed at which the doors will open will increase. It is believed your opponent will get frustrated as the game elapses and will be trying harder to get at you. You will find that it is impossible to close the doors completely. The entity will be keeping them open as you are both now bound by the rules of the game. Your opponent may attempt to speak with you. They may sound like an old friend or family member begging you to open the door and enter the darkness. They may even try and offer you whatever you want. Money, good looks, fame. I shouldn't have to tell you that this is obviously a trick. Don't be a fool. If you start to hear soft singing, cover your ears and scream as loudly as you can. This should make the singing go away. The singing can drive you mad, which obviously isn't good, and will definitely affect your outcome of the game. If you let one of the doors completely open, you've lost. The dark void will completely swallow your room. The floors and walls will become pitch black. You are now in the void, left to endlessly wander until you are stripped of all hope, until you are ready to be digested. If you manage to succeed, the void will lift. Your opponent has left. You should be safe to leave the room, but as a precaution, you should wait a few minutes. Once the coast is clear, you're fine to do whatever you wish without the threat of letting the void in. Congratulations, you survived the horrors of the night. I hope it was worth it. You now have the bragging rights to claim that you have won a game against some horrific entity. Just be warned that it now knows who you are. Attempting the game again could show arrogance and anger the entity. The more you play with fire, the more likely you are to get burned. The trip was a surprise anniversary present from my wife. The holidays had been busy, so we figured what better way to start the new year than in a cabin in the West Virginia woods. My wife had found the place online. It was a newly renovated property right at the edge of a wildlife sanctuary, somewhere we could go to get away from the hustle of DC. A recent storm had just blown through the mid-Atlantic, so snow still blanketed the ground. Out here in the sticks, the back roads had yet to be plowed, so I carefully maneuvered our vehicle down the gravel paths. Wow, it's beautiful, I said to my wife as I pulled up the cabin's narrow driveway. Trees surrounded the property, branches and trunks glistening with ice. I told you, she said gleefully. It looks even better in person. The house sat at the top of a small hill so that it overlooked the wintry landscape surrounding it. Large windows adorned one side, and an expansive patio wrapped around the structure. It was raised off the ground, an impressive set of wooden steps leading up to the front door. It even has a fenced-in yard, my wife said, so that Willow can play in the snow. Willow, our 3-year-old labradoodle, adored the snow, and a fenced-in yard meant she could be outside without me or my wife freezing in the winter weather. It's perfect, I said as I put the car in park. I leaned over the center console and kissed my wife. Thanks for such a wonderful present. It's going to be a great weekend. It only took a few minutes to bring our things inside. The interior of the home was just as beautiful as the exterior. Plush rugs dotted the solid wood flooring, and modern light fixtures hung from the ceiling. The cabin was small, but it was enough for the three of us. The main bedroom branched off to the right of the entryway, which lit up automatically when we stepped through the door. To the left stood the rest of the home. It was an open concept, with the dining room and kitchen flowing into the living room and door to the backyard. I set our bags down in the foyer and walked through the home, taking in the rustic yet contemporary design. My wife followed close behind, Willow's leash in hand. I crossed through the living room and opened the curtains to get a look of the backyard. I heard a jingle behind me and suddenly Willow was at my legs, already eager to get outside. I laughed, then unlocked the back door. Willow bolted outside, but didn't immediately go down the stairs. At first, I thought she was just hesitant of the snow-covered steps. I urged her to go down, but I realized she wasn't staring at the steps. She was staring at something lower. I couldn't see from my angle, so I poked my head out the door to see what it was, but there was nothing there. It was just the steps and the side of the house. "Go on," I prompted Willow, but she wouldn't move. She just kept staring at the side of the house. Impatient in the cold, I nudged her back legs until she eventually ran down the steps. I took the bags into the bedroom. My wife called from the kitchen. "You should go check it out. The bed's enormous, and the view's great." I told her to keep an eye on Willow, then headed toward the bedroom. The bedroom door led into a small hallway, which then opened into the rest of the space. The king bed faced a set of double windows, which provided an almost uninterrupted view of the forest beyond. A small shed stood to the left of the window, only a few feet from the main house. Because the house was raised, I could just make out the top of the shed. I was about to turn around and head back into the kitchen when something caught my eye. A thin layer of snow covered the shed's roof, and near the edge, right next to a tree, looked like a small set of footprints. "Isn't it great?" my wife said, her sudden appearance making me jump. She stood in the doorway, the light from the entryway casting a long shadow into the bedroom. "It is," I said. "These woods are amazing." My wife smiled, then walked to my side. "Do you see those tracks?" I asked, pointing to the top of the shed. She squinted, then nodded. "Oh yeah," she said. "Maybe a squirrel or something lives in that tree." "You think it's a squirrel?" I asked. "It looks too big to be a squirrel." She shrugged, then rested her head on my chest. "Maybe a raccoon, then." I nodded, but wasn't convinced. A raccoon was closer in size, but the tracks still looked too big. "Should we check on Willow?" my wife asked after a few minutes. "You go ahead," I said. "I'm going to unpack in here." She nodded, then left the bedroom. Grabbing our bags, I wheeled them over to the dresser and closet and began unpacking. We were only here for a few days, but I hated living out of a suitcase. Crouched over, I unzipped the luggage and started pulling out our clothes. I was about to open the dresser drawer when I heard a whisper behind me. "What was that?" I asked, standing up and turning around to face the doorway. I expected to see my wife, but no one was there. The door frame was empty, just the wall of the entryway staring back at me. I stood frozen in my spot, slowly looking around the room. I pressed the clothes against my chest, as if they could somehow protect me. I waited to hear the whispering again, but nothing came. Just the wind outside and the creaks of the house. Slowly, I opened the dresser drawer and placed the stack of clothes into it. I bent over to pull out more clothes when I heard the whispering again. This time, I snapped around, bringing myself to my full height. But again, the small hallway was empty. I was certain I'd heard a voice, though. Not my wife's. It had been high and raspy, like the person's throat was raw. I remained frozen for what felt like an eternity, but I didn't hear anything else. Unsettled, I quickly made my way back to the living room. Rounding the corner, I saw my wife standing at the window with her back to me. "Were you talking to me just now?" I asked, trying to stay calm. She turned around to face me. "No," she said. "Just watching Willow." "Did you have the radio on or something?" She looked at me quizzically, then shook her head. "Nope. Everything's all right?" I bit the inside of my lip, then nodded my head, a tad too aggressively. "Just thought I heard something," I said, making my way across the room. I rested my head on her shoulder and looked out at Willow. We let her play outside for another few minutes before calling her back in. Like before, once she was at the bottom of the stairs, she stared at the side of the house instead of coming up. My wife had to call her 3 times before she eventually came. We spent the rest of the evening playing games, eating dinner, and watching TV. Close to midnight, we decided to go to bed. After getting ready, we crawled under the blankets, and my wife pulled up a show on her phone. Within a few minutes, I felt myself drifting off to sleep. The next thing I knew, a soft thud woke me up. A jolt of panic ripped through me before I realized it was just Willow jumping down from the bed. Throwing the covers off, I followed Willow to the bedroom door. The entryway light bled in from underneath the door, so I closed my eyes before walking out. Blindly, I shuffled toward the back door, Willow right behind. As I placed my hand on the doorknob, Willow began to growl lightly at my feet. She'd peeked her head through the bottom of the curtain and was peering outside, staring at the darkened yard. Goosebumps crawled across my arms, and I slowly lifted my hand from the doorknob to the light switch. I squinted to see outside, but I wasn't wearing my glasses and couldn't make out much. I scanned the yard but could only see the soft outline of trees and the small scattering of chairs that surrounded a fireplace in the back corner. Willow let out another growl before releasing a clipped bark. She almost never barked at home, and it was only ever at people. My heart thumped against my chest as I pressed my face right up to the small pane of glass set in the door. With a flick of my wrist, I turned on the porch lamp. Bright light instantly flooded the yard, and I scanned for any motion, any sign that someone was there. Nothing moved, and I almost let myself relax. Then I saw it, and my blood ran cold. There, in the back of the yard, something sat atop one of the chairs. The trees cast long shadows over that part of the yard, but something was definitely there. A solid mass atop the chair farthest from the house. It looked to be about 3 feet tall, but without my glasses, I couldn't make out any more details. Cursing, I ran back to the bedroom. The sudden commotion set Willow into a barking fit as my feet slammed across the floor. In just a few seconds, I'd made it to our room and was scrambling for my glasses on my nightstand. My hands met cool metal, and I grabbed the glasses. I ran back toward the window. Jamming the glasses onto my face, I nearly slammed into the door as I peered through the pane again. Immediately, my eyes found the chair. There, resting atop it, was a thick piece of firewood. I stared at it, as if my attention would suddenly reveal what it had been. Had that firewood been there all day? Had I seen it when I'd let Willow out before? I was ripped from my thoughts by my wife stumbling out of our room, shouting my name and asking what was going on. I told her what had happened, that Willow had woken me up to go outside, that she'd started to growl, that I'd seen something or someone in the chair, and that I'd run into our room to get my glasses. She peered out the window before letting out a sigh and telling me it was a piece of wood. I agreed with her and apologized for having woken her up. Something was off about the scene, but I couldn't figure out what. so we let Willow out and watched her together. Me keeping a close eye on the area around the fireplace. After a minute or so, she came back inside and all three of us went back to bed. For the next few hours, I still couldn't sleep. Something still bothered me. I tried to shut off my brain, but it kept working at some unseen problem that was just below the surface. I was just about to drift off when I realized what had been bothering me. There hadn't been any snow on top of the firewood. All the other chairs had an inch or so of snow dusting their tops, but the wood had been absolutely clean, which meant it couldn't have been there when the snow had been falling just a day earlier. Either the log had been placed on the chair the day we got to the cabin, or someone had been sitting there and had used the log as a replacement when I'd run to grab my glasses. A few moments later, a second realization hit me. When I'd gotten out of bed to take Willow outside, the light in the entryway had been on. Neither of us had stepped into the foyer yet, which meant someone else had triggered the light. Someone else had been outside of our bedroom door. The realization made my stomach drop. Someone had been in the house. Someone maybe still was in the house. I resisted the urge to shake my wife awake, instead thinking through what to do next. I laid in bed, my eyes open and staring at the ceiling. I tried to think of any other explanation, but there were simply too many things that weren't adding up. My thoughts continued to spin when suddenly the light in the entryway clicked on. I laid frozen in my bed, not daring to move a muscle. Then, from the foyer, a long shadow slipped into the room. Someone was standing on the other side of the door. They stood there for what felt like ages, and I didn't dare move. Even though my heartbeat was thudding in my ears, I heard the quiet noise of the doorknob being turned ever so slowly. However, after a few moments, the handle stuck. I'd at least had the foresight to lock the bedroom door. The person on the other end tried a little more forcefully to open the door, but they weren't able to make it budge. A few seconds passed, then I heard the doorknob be released and the shadow slipped away. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. We weren't out of this by a long shot, but at least the person hadn't been able to get into the bedroom. I decided to give them a few minutes to leave, and then I'd wake up my wife, call the police, and drive to the nearest hotel. Just as I was about to roll over and nudge my wife awake, another shadow entered the room. This time, though, the entryway light didn't click on. It took me a moment to realize where the shadow was coming from. Then I realized there was a full moon tonight, and the shadow was coming from the window. Without being able to stop myself and having more courage since I knew the person was outside, I bolted up from the bed. My eyes went straight for the shed. I knew that's where the culprit would be. I'd expected to see a man staring in through the glass, a burglar trying to assess his target, but what I saw melted my bones. A small figure crouched on top of the shed, a clawed hand grasping the tree for balance. Even at its full height, the creature couldn't be more than 3 feet tall. Its flesh was gray and emaciated, as if it hadn't eaten or seen the sun in years. Beady red eyes sat sunken in its bony skull, and a row of sharp fangs glinted in the moonlight. Upon seeing me rise, it released a wretched screech, like the sound of an animal caught in a snare. Instantly, I knew what it was doing, screaming a warning that it had been seen. As if on cue, a loud thumping noise burst from inside the closet, the sound of fists slamming against a barricade. Our luggage. After unloading our things, I'd placed the bags on the floor of the closet. Whatever creature was outside must be a counterpart trying to get through some sort of passageway in the closet floor. As if egging on its comrade, the monster outside slammed its fist against the glass and began to shriek even louder. By now, Willow was awake and barking, and my wife was upright, her eyes wild with fear. With no time to explain, I picked up Willow and grabbed my wife's hand, pulling both of them from the bed. I only let go of her hand to grab the keys on the nightstand. When we rushed into the entryway and out the front door, clawed feet scrambling across the patio behind us, but I didn't turn back. Instead, I clicked the car unlocked and, fully awake now, my wife grabbed Willow from my arms before ripping open the passenger door and throwing herself inside. I dashed around the side of the car and jumped inside, my wife having already opened the door. I slammed it shut with one hand while I plunged the key into the ignition and started the car. Something heavy slammed against the back window, and I glanced in the mirror to see a pair of red eyes slide out of view. I threw the car into drive and peeled away from the house. It wasn't until we were near the end of the driveway that I risked another glance back. The front door of the house was wide open, but other than that, everything seemed normal. Then, I noticed something in the yard. The side of the house had a small door in it that was hanging open, a door right at the foot of the stairs. Depending on the ground under the home, it was possible the door led to a crawl space, a few feet tall, a crawl space that spanned the entire length of the house. We drove until we found the nearest police station. It was early Saturday morning, but we talked to the officers on duty. I told them what I saw, but they seemed doubtful. However, they said they'd check it out and asked if we wanted to go back with them. I told them hell no. My wife and I stayed in a nearby hotel that night, and the police called us a few hours later. And they said nothing was out of the ordinary besides the door we'd left open. I asked them to check the crawl space. They said they already had and confirmed it indeed did go underneath the entire house. Other than a few animal skeletons, though, there wasn't anything under there. They said I likely just saw a raccoon or some other animal outside, and that I probably just dreamed the person at the bedroom door. They said they've gotten quite a few similar reports from the other city folk vacationing in the area, and that it was likely just our imaginations, not used to the woods. When I asked about the passage into the closet, they also confirmed it was there. They agreed it was strange that the house had a direct entry point from the crawl space into the main bedroom, but it wasn't big enough for an adult to get through. Maybe a child, but not a full-grown man or woman. Once the sun was fully up, and with a police escort, my wife and I returned to the cabin to get our belongings. She still wasn't sure what happened, but she believed me that someone tried to break in. After we collected our stuff, I walked through the house for one final check. Certain we hadn't left anything in the main bedroom, I went to close the door when I noticed small scratch marks on the handle. Looking more closely, I noticed that someone or something had broken the lock. I shut the door and suddenly realized how dark it was in the foyer. Looking up, I saw that the bulb in the light had been removed. I told the police about it, and they said they'd check it out, but I could tell they didn't believe me. There wasn't much else my wife and I could do, so we loaded up the car and started our drive back to DC. It wasn't until about an hour into our drive that I noticed a smudge on the back window, a smear of red blood. I clicked on the rear windshield wipers and held the button down until the smudge was gone. Then we drove the remaining hour back to the city. The entire trip behind us now. City apartments are rough. My first two places were both basements because that's what you can afford these days if you're looking to live alone. Third place, no lie, had a window facing a brick wall only 3 feet away. I was never looking for a spectacular view. I just wanted a decent window. Until last month when I got one. I moved in December 1st. To this super small but super decent apartment only a few minute walk from the subway. The main living space extended from the kitchen, and a flimsy sliding door separated that from a small bedroom space. And the east wall of that bedroom space a floor-to-ceiling window. Sure, it only overlooked the dirty street ahead, a small coffee place, and a huge community housing building, but my god, the air, the sounds, the sunlight, it was perfect and so shockingly affordable. I'll make a note here that I've never been much of a horror movie person, just never caught my interest. So when I couldn't find any bug reports on the building, it just seemed like a lucky break. Anyway, after settling my debt with my moving helpers, a 6-pack of beer and a large pizza, obviously, they were off on their way and I began putting together my home. I started with the Wi-Fi and living space so I could work to some tunes, then unboxed some stuff for the kitchen. As I was sliding some plates into my cupboard, a knock came at my door. Shit, maybe my music was too loud. Standing on the other side of the door was a small woman wearing a hijab. I smiled apologetically. Sorry, is the music too loud? No, it's fine. The walls here are good, she assured me. I wanted to say hello. Welcome you to the building. Oh, I hadn't expected such a warm reception. I'd never been greeted by a neighbor in any of my previous places. Thanks so much. I'm Lewis. Kibla, love to meet you. She peered into my apartment. This looks good. Do you need curtains? I can give you some. I have extra. Thanks, but I'll get around to it. I'm excited to get some December sunlight coming through, I said with a laugh. She didn't laugh. It's no problem. They are lovely curtains, and you need your privacy, she said. I chuckled, feeling some tension in the air. I'll make sure to get some curtains up soon. In the meantime, I'll hide all this. I gestured to my lackluster physique, under wraps. Again, no reaction from my neighbor. A moment later, she forced a small laugh, then nodded. If you need anything, I'm down the hall. 1710. She nodded once more before turning away and retreating down the hall. I waved as I watched her go. Nice lady. Odd, though. Which brings us to my first night. Dark hit hard and fast, but there were a couple yellowed streetlights bathing the street and parking lot outside the closed coffee shop. And the man that was yelling. It started just as I was laying down on my bed. A senseless hollering. Strings of profanity mixed with accusations at no one. But I'm not new to the city. I was near community housing, a place where folks with severe mental illness can very much end up. So above all else, I knew to be patient. Maybe this was why the place cost so little. It would have to be pretty extreme for that much of a price decrease. This set me on edge. After about an hour of the noise ebbing and flowing, I brought myself up and out of the bed and to the window. I looked out over the cold street and watched the snow get caught up in gusts and brought to the man. He walked in jerky circles, flailing his limbs from time to time. I touched the cold glass. At that moment, he spun around and faced me, as if he could hear that barest touch. He froze. No more noise, no more circles. He just stared back up at me. He couldn't have been staring at me. I was standing in my dark room, alone, 17 stories up, but from everything I could tell, he was standing in that parking lot, leaning at the slightest angle, head cocked right up at me. This wasn't good. I took a step backwards, still watching him. The moment I moved, he broke into a dead sprint. He was running directly at me. My heart leapt, but I was inside. There were many locked doors between myself and him. It was fine. That didn't stop me from running up to my apartment door and triple-checking it was indeed still locked, and then watching my apartment door from my kitchen table, then watching the street from my window to see if I could see him again, then the kitchen, then the window. It wasn't a great night. The next morning as I opened my door, it pushed against something. I full panicked for a moment, but immediately recognized it as a bundled up window curtain with a note. For the nights, they aren't people, they are cold. Kibla. This was unsettling for sure, but also on a different level, incredibly insulting. Was she talking about the community housing folk? They were sick, not people. I let my indignant humanitarian side overpower my anxiousness over all this, and tossed the curtain inside and continued on my way. I got a donut and some bad brew at the coffee shop. Found out they only operate from 9 to 5, which isn't ideal for late night cravings, and head off to work. Night 2 was much quieter. I didn't hear a sound above the passing night traffic as I lay down to sleep. This felt much more comforting, and then it wasn't. It was too damn quiet. There were other people in the building. There was the community housing just across the street. Why was it so quiet? I stood up again and wandered to the window. Nothing of note out there. No folks wandering the street. Only difference from the night before was one street light had started flickering. Maybe I was just getting in my head over all this. Then I saw the group on the balcony. 5 people stood on the balcony of the community housing building, about 5 stories higher than myself. I couldn't entirely tell if they were speaking or anything from this far, but one thing was for sure. Each stood facing out, facing me, staring at me. I whispered some curse under my breath and immediately turned to grab that curtain near my front door. I stomped around my house, hoping the sound of my own movement would help me establish some sort of connection to reason. I was imagining things. I was getting worked up over nothing. But if the curtain would help me feel better, easy as that. Let's get it up. I got back to my room just in time to see them jump. In unison, each of the 5 people on the balcony easily climbed over the rail and stepped off, still staring directly at me through my window. I dropped the curtain in terror and shouted a meaningless, "Stop!" I scrambled to find my phone and dialed 911 while I made a mad dash out of my apartment and into the elevator. Police and ambulance were on the way. As the elevator rang at ground floor, I ran out of my building and into the cold. And holy shit was it cold. The biting night stung at my skin all over. Seeing as I'd left wearing only my PJs and slippers, I ran across the quiet road and past the shop to the building, dreading what I was going to see. They stood there. That's all. There were the 5 figures I'd seen only moments ago, plummeting from over 20 stories, stiffly but casually looking at me with blank eyes. Nothing seemed to be wrong with them physically. I saw no signs of injury, but behind those eyes I couldn't tell what I was seeing. I walked closer to the building, scanning the area to see if I was wrong. It was a different group of people, but only came back to them as sirens began blaring. They walked back inside. My mind was a mess. I felt like I was going crazy as the police talked with me, but I held my composure and assured them my eyes must have been playing tricks on me in the night. The sirens retreated back into the city. I slammed my fist against Kibla's door the next day. It opened only a few inches, revealing a chain lock and her eyes. "What the hell is going on?" I asked. "You didn't put up the curtain?" She asked, as if this was some normal irritation. How is a goddamn curtain going to stop people from jumping from fucking buildings? I demanded. "They can see well in the dark. They've noticed you. They won't hurt you, but they'll want to be close," she said as calmly as always. "What do those people want?" "They aren't people, and they want to be warm." I sputtered, wordless. How do you respond to that? "Put the curtain up. It might not stop it anymore, but it'll give you peace of mind," was all she said before closing her door again. So I did. I put up the curtain and started looking for another apartment. I didn't know what was going on, but I could stay here the 2 necessary months and head out without messing up my finances too bad. My last night, The curtains were drawn shut and my lights were all off, leaving me in pitch darkness. But there was no way I was getting to sleep. The past 2 days were running through my head on an endless loop. What was happening in that building with those people? They were people, right? A quiet noise caught my attention. Barely a noise, really. Like the sound of a mouse speaking in the wall. It would be nice to have a normal issue like mice. The same sound, but slightly louder. I curled up in my bed. I didn't want to deal with anything tonight, but I also knew no sleep was coming if I didn't deal with whatever was causing this sound. I slumped out of bed and listened closely, tilting my head towards the wall. Silence. Maybe I should just attempt to sleep through it. A singular clicking noise. Like hail falling against glass. There was a chance I was just hearing something coming from outside, and I was fine. Or far from fine. They won't hurt you. I shuffled towards the window. They want to be warm. I pulled the curtain aside. Darkness. No streetlight. No snow. Nothing. But the same darkness as my room. I furrowed my brow, absolutely lost. I hit the switch on my lamp. Naked bodies stuck to the glass from the outside. Awfully contorted and piled bodies, all trying to touch as much of their flesh as possible to the glass dividing us. Their skin folded and flattened in still life before me, with patches of hair and scars and disease. The various faces clouded the window with their heavy breath, tongues and teeth pressed hard almost like a sucker fish, plastered and frozen in ecstasy. No, not suckerfish. More like moths. I screamed and fell back, holding down the bile trying to shoot up. I huddled into a fetal position, rolled away from the sight before me, and I can only describe it as I lost my mind. I don't remember much until dawn came and I saw light piercing through my unmarred window. I left that day. I went to a friend's place and stayed on their couch. My friends and a couple cousins I have here in the city had to get my belongings. They all think I just had some sort of random psychological meltdown. It took me this long to get to the point where I'm even considering leaving this house and going back to work. I'm going to live with friends for a while, and if I do someday get a place again, I'm so fine with basements. It all started when I was 12 years old. I was living with my mom in a small house out on the countryside of Sweden. From a young age, I never believed in boogeymen hiding under my bed or monsters in my closet. But it all changed the night of my 12th birthday. I did my normal before bed routine of brushing my teeth, reading my favorite book, and then turning off the light ready to fall asleep. I woke up around 1:34 a.m. to a weird noise coming from somewhere in my room. At first, I just thought it must have been the tree branch of an old oak that was stood beside outside my bedroom. But then I heard something whisper my name, Jacob. That's when I started to get scared. I hid under my sheets thinking it would protect me from whatever was in my room. But the scratching and whispering continued for hours. It was almost dawn when it stopped whispering my name. After what I believed was an eternity of waiting for that voice to disappear, I mustered up enough courage to peek up from my blankets. All I saw was my normal room, but in the middle of my floor was a note. On that note was something that looked to be written in blood. The note said, "Won't you come play with me, Jacob?" That's when I heard my mother walking around downstairs. I rushed down the stairs to show her the note and tell her what had happened. But when I started to explain what had happened only hours ago, she shook her head and said it was due to a mix of my imagination and all the stories I've read before bedtime. I reached for the note which I had put in my pocket, but when I put my hand in my pocket there was nothing. The note had disappeared. I stood there dumbfounded over how that note could have just vanished. Every night without exception since I was 12, I've heard that voice whispering, calling out to me from my closet. One time when I was home alone, I decided I'd had enough of the constant whispers and scratching. I went over to that door at exactly 1:34 a.m. and opened it to see the closet wasn't full of clothes anymore, but that it had a huge hole at the back leading into the wall. That's when I saw it for the first time. The thing, the monster that had haunted me for the last 5 years, was a large and skinny man with a top hat and a permanent smile that went from ear to ear. When it saw me, it walked slowly toward me. In a panic, I closed the door and started to run out of my room. I was midway on the stairs when I heard my closet door slamming open with a quick crash like it had been ripped off from the hinges. When I was all the way down the stairs, I looked up to see if that thing had followed me. And when I looked up those stairs, I saw something that would haunt me for the rest of my life. I saw the creature on all fours with a wide smile on its face. I got a better view of the creature's face in the light, and I saw 2 hollow sockets where its eyes were supposed to go. It let out a demonic screech that forced me to cover my ears as I ran outside my house. It followed me as I bolted towards the forest where I thought I was safe. As I ran for what felt like miles, I could still hear that creature's screech, as if it was right behind me. A few minutes later, the screech got quieter. That's when I took the opportunity to hide behind a fallen tree a few hundred feet in front of me. I waited for what felt like hours when I remembered that my mother would be home soon. I ran as quickly as I could towards the direction I thought was leading to my house. But after being lost for hours, dawn finally came, and I had found my way home. But when I got to the house, I saw a tall silhouette with a top hat that was waving to me from my living room window. My stomach sank when I saw my mother's car wrecked in the driveway of my house. I saw a trail of blood leading towards my front door. I walked inside to see blood and flesh was shredded all over the hallway and kitchen. When the police came, they didn't believe my story and arrested me for the murder of my mother. This was 25 years ago. Now I'm a free man. I went to therapy for my trauma, but from that night, I will always remember that silhouette waving towards me. But my son recently started complaining about scratching and hearing whispers from his closet. I was born and raised in a calm town. Crime was non-existent and everyone got along with each other. It was the last day of school. I met with my friends at the end of the day as we made a plan to camp in the forest for the whole night. Finally arriving home, I greeted my parents. "Hey, how was school?" My mom said excitedly. "It was fine, like usual," I said while releasing a sigh. My dad never greeted me. It didn't mean he didn't love me, he was just so invested in watching the football game. I headed to my room and started packing some food in my backpack. My parents didn't know about the plan me and my friends had made. It didn't matter. They were going to leave at 5 p.m. for a baseball game. I was planning to leave the house at about 12 a.m. and meet my friends at the gas station near the forest. After I took a shower, I applied some mosquito repellent and went on to leave the house. It was roughly 11:55 p.m. The walk to the gas station took about 5 minutes. While walking to the gas station, I couldn't help but notice the light fog that was covering the town. About 200 feet away from the gas station, I could already see my friends huddled up. When I arrived at the station, I greeted them. "Sup, Jay?" said Michael with a slight smirk. I proceeded to then greet all my friends. We decided to enter the gas station to pick up some marshmallows and lighter fluid. After we bought the extra supplies we needed, we headed towards the trail that led into the forest. We could hear the sounds of owls hooting and the howls of coyotes. We walked for a good 10 minutes until we found a great flat area to set up the tents. We were pretty deep in the forest. We had 5 tents. It was decided that there was going to be 2 people per tent. I was assigned the job to start the fire. I started looking for small sticks to medium-sized ones to start the fire. After finding about 20 good ones, I planted them in an upwards position which I had learned from a survival documentary I had watched. It supposedly made the fire last longer and made it stronger. I doused the wood with lighter fluid and threw a lit match. Immediately after I did, a huge fire sparked and all my friends cheered. I kept feeding it the sticks I had found. The fire, now too big for the small sticks, I went and found about 20 big sticks which would surely last way longer. After all the tents were up and good, and everyone had finished their assigned job, Kayla, my friend, suggested we sit around the fire and roast the marshmallows we had bought. Everyone agreed to the idea. I wasn't really hungry, so I didn't eat any. I don't know why, but I kept feeling patches of cold touching my neck. Every time it happened, I turned around just to see the tall trees that towered over us. I decided not to tell anyone, not wanting to worry them or ruin the vibe. Conveniently, my friend Gabe had bought a couple packs of beers with his fake ID. After a bit of hesitation, I agreed to drink a couple of beers, hoping that it would ease me a bit. It was now getting real late. We all agreed that we should get into the tents. Michael was the person I had to share the tent with. I decided not to put out the fire, thinking it would provide us with heat and protection from the animals. After struggling to fall asleep, I heard a sound from the tent. I thought it was my mind playing games with me. While trying to sleep again, I heard the same sound again. This time it was louder. I decided to tap Michael on the shoulder to ask him if he had also heard it. "Hey, wake up," I said while tapping him on the shoulder. "What?" He said with a tired look on his face. "Did you hear that?" I said, "No, chill out. You had a few beers, remember?" He said. He then fell asleep. What he said was true. I did have a couple more beers than I had planned. I had never been drunk before. This is probably what it felt like, I thought. I finally fell asleep, but then I woke up again. This time a loud crack. It sounded like a tree had snapped. Startled, I reached over for Michael to ask him if he had heard that. He wasn't there. I thought he probably had gone out to pee, so I opened the tent. I peeked my head out, trying to look for Michael. I noticed the large fire was now non-existent. After fully coming out of the tent, still searching for Michael, I called out his name. He didn't answer. I yelled out his name again. Nothing. I went to the tent that was next to me and Michael's. I opened it. No one was there. I then went to the tent that was next to that one. No one was there. After checking every tent, no one was in them. I then heard a low hum sound followed by the scream of Michael's voice. He yelled out a cry for help, then silence. I noticed his yell came from the west side of the forest. Moving my head to the direction I heard the yell come from, I saw something that still haunts me to this day. It was big, very big, bigger than the 40-foot trees that flooded the forest. It had large, glowing red eyes and long, slim arms. Frightened, I grabbed my backpack and started running. I ran as fast as I could. The weight of the bag was holding me back. I dropped it while running, and at that moment my life was more precious than my phone or anything in my bag. As soon as I had run roughly 20 feet, I heard that thing start knocking trees over while chasing me. Too scared to look back, I kept running. After a good minute of running, which felt like an hour, I guess it stopped chasing me. I didn't hear the trees falling over anymore. I was sure as hell not going to stop running just because of that. I kept running at a pretty good pace until I made it to the end of the trail. I ran to the gas station and asked the old man for a phone. I called the police. After arriving on the scene, they went into the forest to try to find my friends. It has now been 10 years since this happened. I don't live in that town anymore. My parents still do. After multiple manhunts, my friends still haven't been found. I'm also pretty sure that the thing that killed them is still alive. I love my family cat, but it is the most insufferable pet at night. Before I go to bed, I'll give him plenty of opportunities to come into my room because I know, eventually, I'll hear that light scratching on my door at ridiculous hours of the night for him to be let in. And every night, I give in and open the door and listen to his tiny claws tap across the room to jump onto my bed to fall asleep by my foot. Yesterday, I offered again, but nope. He refused me like he refuses me every night. With my ego crushed, I closed my door, and my heart, cruel cat, and went to bed. Maybe he resents me for moving out, or maybe he likes to spend half of the night in the comfortable king-size bed that my little sister has snatched from me instead of the single bed in a box room that I have to now stay in whenever I visit. Shut up and go to sleep, I told myself, smiling. Last night, I was woken up again by the scratching, so I walked to the door mostly asleep and opened it without greeting the bugger. I slipped straight back into the comfort of my bed and lifted my feet up. I could hear the tapping on the floorboards as he jumped up the foot of my bed and under the covers. I lowered my feet and it landed on him. Normally, my heavy feet would make him claw at them until they moved, but there was no reaction. Just gentle purring. That and the soft breeze from my open window lulled me into a deeper sleep. I began to automatically do the usual thing of stroking my cat's head and back with my toes. My eyes opened fast. Instead of the dense, smooth fur, I felt something hairless and cold to the touch, like something dead. And when I reached the back, my toes felt like they were running across metal bars, and there was too much resistance and tug on the skin. My body froze. Its deep purring began to sound gargly, and started to get louder and louder. Alarm bells went off in my brain, and signals fired through my body to make it jump out of bed. The reach out to turn the lamp on. As soon as the light switch clicked and the room flooded with dim light, my back pressed against the wall near the bedroom door. My wide eyes burned as they adjusted, and I stared right at that thing, still at the foot of my bed, all curled up and naked. It was the size of an average adult man. It was very slender, with its almost transparent skin clinging onto every bone on its body like a thin, wet shirt. Its legs and arms were unusually long, and it had enormous hands and feet attached to them. The feet and hands had disgustingly long, yellow fingernails that were cracked on the edges. There was no hair on its body, and since its skin was so thin, I could faintly make out the contents of the inside of its body. It began to crawl out of bed with its arms reaching down on the floor first. I could hear the tapping of the fingernails on the wooden floors as he brought down the rest of his body into a squat. His hands were on the floor, and his knees by his ears. It looked up at me with its big, wide eyes, which were mostly covered by its black pupils. It was still purring, but it was starting to sound more and more distorted, which didn't stop until it began opening its mouth a few moments later. It was so bizarre. It should have stopped opening, but it kept dropping lower and lower. It also had no teeth, but that didn't make it any less threatening. It finally stopped, and it let out a meow, and then repeated in a familiar voice, "Can I come in?" Its mouth didn't move at all when those sounds came out. It just stared straight into my eyes. Fear struck me even harder when I recognized the voice. When I woke in the morning today, I told my mom that I must have been dreaming her asking if she could come into my room at 3 a.m. because she would never ask for permission, but also, what would she want to do at 3 a.m. in my room? We had laughed at my comments, but I definitely wasn't laughing now because I know now that that wasn't a dream. This thing was trying to get me to let it in. As it saw my face distort out of fear and my eyes pooling up, it began to smile a toothless smile, the widest smile I had ever seen. I began to tremble as it licked its lips and began walking towards me in all fours. I could see the outline of its arched spine shifting as it crawled, and it didn't take long to reach me in that tiny room. Jerking its head forward, it pressed its icy nose against my skin and inhaled deeply. Its eyes rolled back, exposing only the whites, and its body began to shudder. I was so taken by fear that all my pathetic body could conjure up was a soft whimper. It looked up, and its thin, crackled lips curled back as its mouth opened to make my shaking finger into it. Once it was in, it closed shut. At first, I could only feel the wetness, and then I began feeling pressure pushing down onto my finger from above and below. When I found the courage to look down, it was staring right at my face whilst moving its jaws like it was warming up his mouth. Then its eyes widened and I felt it, its gums pushing down, crushing my finger so easily, like it were the cartilage on a chicken bone. Pain shot up my arm and I opened my mouth to scream, but I could only let out a long, dry wheezing like my breath had been knocked out of my body. It smiled again whilst letting go. My finger almost looked flat like it had been crushed by a hydraulic press. The shaking of its body began to get aggressive, and once it noticed that, it stepped back. All the way back until its back pressed against the wall on the opposite side of the room. Its final act began. It inhaled deeply and began opening its mouth again. This time, once it opened as much as it could naturally, it reached both its long hands into its mouth. One of its hands clasped onto the gums on the floor of its mouth, whilst the other reached from behind its head and clasped onto the gums on the roof of the mouth. It began to pull from either direction as horrifying noises of cracking and tearing ensued. Not once did his eyes leave my gaze. He held me hostage throughout the entire nightmarish scene. Once it looked like it could fit a human head into its mouth, it stopped. Then it began to walk towards me. I started to say my prayers as my vision blurred from the tears. I couldn't move. I was going to die. This thing was going to tower over me, envelop its mouth around my head to crush me and consume me. I began shaking as I imagined the immense pressure on my head making the blood rush to every orifice in my body, making it ooze out of my eyes, my ears, my nose, my legs. My legs. I could feel the familiar feeling of warm, soft fur rubbing against my shins. Purring. This time, I knew this purr. It was my stupid cat, and for some reason, although my body had frozen when my own life was being threatened, it became swift and mobile when I thought about this thing crushing my helpless cat. I looked down, grabbed it, and jumped onto my bed. This damn cat was fighting me and managed to leap out of my arms. He arched his back whilst the ginger hairs on his body puffed up and began hissing sharply at the monster. I almost leaped at it, but I noticed the monster looked scared. With its mouth wide open, it let out a sharp screech, and before I knew it, it was out of the window. I have never seen anything move so fast. I was left stood on the bed, frozen again. The cat jumped onto the bed like nothing happened, rubbed against my legs a few times, and decided to crawl into a ball at my feet to sleep when it realized I'd need longer to thaw. My back slowly began to slide down the wall. and I was sat with my savior snoozing by my feet. I stared at him for what seemed like an eternity, and daylight finally began to seep into my room. Eventually, I started to hear the hustle and bustle around the house as my family began their day, but I just sat on my bed, defrosting. Then I fell onto my side and fell asleep. I avoided my family all day under the guise of illness. I'm awake now and it's night again. Earlier, I called my cat and he did the weirdest thing. He came in and curled into bed with me. It's strange, but whenever he's purring near me, my injured finger doesn't throb with pain. I've got the nightlight on, the door and window closed, and my cat in my arms. I'm waiting to see if it comes back again. Michael, if you are reading this letter, it means that either the mail is late, or it is August 8th, and you have not gotten any phone calls from me. I know we're not on good terms right now, but you are the only person I trust to not just take the money I enclosed and not do anything. If it is August 8th, and I haven't called, that means that an experiment of mine has gone wrong, and I need you to come and help me out. Please take the money as an advance payment. I can give you more when you show up. 1. Go to the Last Chance Inn in John Day, Oregon. 2. Room 213 will be booked in my name through the 15th. Tell the owner your name, and they should let you in. If they don't, you'll have to break in. 3. Make sure that the TV and bed are exactly where they are in the drawing of the room I stuck in the envelope. Do not move anything around or place your luggage in the room. 4. Make sure your left hand is palm up in the correct spot of the bed, marked on drawing, and that nothing else is on the bed. 5. With your right hand, grab onto something sturdy that you can get a good grip on. The radiator pipe might work. 6. Remain silent. 7. Now for the weird part. If you did this right, at around 21:59, you should feel something grab your left wrist very hard and try to pull you. At this point, follow the steps below as fast as possible. 8. Close your eyes and hold on tight. Do not try to see what is grabbing you or allow yourself to be pulled. 9. Grab the wrist of the hand pulling you as hard as you can. Do not let it go no matter what you hear. 10. Pull that wrist as far as possible. Do not stop pulling or let go of your anchor. 11. That's it. If it worked, you'll know it. This probably sounds like a lunatic rodent, and you might not be wrong to think that. I am sorry about what happened last year. I don't expect you to forgive me. Ed. That was the letter that I found waiting at my office yesterday in a wrinkled, taped-up envelope alongside $300 cash and a crude sketch of a floor plan. Ed was the sort of person who would enthusiastically jump into a wood chipper to test his new homemade anti-wood chipper suit, and, more unfortunately, was also the sort who couldn't fathom why others wouldn't want to be in the control group. I doubted that those last lines of the letter had any real meaning. More likely Ed had read them in a book on how humans express regret and thought they might persuade me to come. I threw the letter in the recycling bin and resumed typing. Jack's smiling face propped over the gray wall of my cubicle. Seeing him under the bright fluorescent lights of the office never failed to make me wish for a power outage. Willis wanted someone to volunteer to come in this weekend. I told him you weren't busy since, you know, you never are. Under the desk, I discreetly pulled the letter out of the recycling bin. Actually, Jack, I'm afraid I won't be able to make it. I'm visiting an old friend this weekend. John Day, as I soon discovered, was an exceedingly annoying location to get to. It was squeezed into a river valley approximately 80 miles west of the highway in eastern Oregon, which placed it about 300 miles away from anywhere worth visiting. Besides pine trees, farms, and Smokey Bear signs warning me that the entire state was a tinderbox, the only entertainment I could find was one of the seemingly omnipresent, religious radio stations. A grandfatherly voice conning idiots out of their money. And remember, we are sinners at heart, and the path to redemption leads through holy fire. But all of you, my listeners, all of you can be saved. All may walk the path of the righteous. All it takes is to open your hearts to the Lord, to face the fire without fear, to accept judgment and beg forgiveness, and of course, to donate generously to this station. Seriously? On a more positive note, the long drive did give me plenty of time to think about the contents of the letter. Even for something Ed had written, this letter was, by all accounts, bizarre. Usually Ed's requests had involved me unwittingly purchasing and transporting chemicals that I strongly suspected he was no longer allowed to have. This, on the other hand, sounded more like an occult ritual than a science experiment. By the time I reached the town's welcome sign, I placed 90% odds on him just wanting me out here for some other reason, and 10% odds on him jumping out of the closet like a maniac at 10 p.m. My resigned annoyance turned to worry. Then, when the motel owner confirmed Ed's booking and showed me to room 213, he swore the room had not been opened since Ed's arrival 3 days prior. But it appeared as if it had never been used at all. No scientific equipment, no explosives, not so much as a single article of clothing, and no Ed to be found anywhere, even in the traditional monster hangouts inside the closet and under the bed. I was now faced with the very real possibility of actually following through with this, whatever it was. Just think of the money, I muttered to myself, flopping onto the bed. For all his faults, Ed had never failed to pay well. Something crinkled under the pillow. I lifted it up and took a look. A torn half sheet of notebook paper, half fallen behind the bed. The top has perforations where it had been torn off a binder. One side was blank, but the other had the word convergences at the top and a chart below. 2 columns, 3 rows before the page ended in a tear. I read them to myself under my breath. 120:07:30, 222:00:30, 210:16:45. I could make out the top of 213 in the first column below that. The tear had erased the bottom of the number and, presumably, its corresponding 4 digits. A green circle had been drawn around that row. I stuffed the note in my pocket. Best not to think too hard about what Ed had wrote down. Hours later, with several drinks inside me and my luggage stored safely in my car, I found myself sitting on the floor of room 213, watching Pirates of the Caribbean on some godforsaken rural TV station. To fit my hands into the positions Ed had drawn on the diagram, I had sandwiched myself awkwardly between the bed and the wall. My left hand was laying on the bed, twisted palm up, and the right was next to the radiator. At least the awkward pose would keep me from falling asleep. The bedside clock read 9:58 p.m., and Jack Sparrow was just stepping off his dinghy when I noticed a faint blue glow in the peripheral vision and felt something brush my wrist. I had no sooner closed my eyes than something grabbed me so hard I felt like my forearm was about to shatter. The floor fell away beneath me, and I began to sink through what felt like tar, my left arm being dragged downward and my body following behind. Even through my closed eyelids, I could see blue flashes. I began to hear things, whispers that wrapped around my head from one ear to another far slower than should sound. Sounds of laughter. I was not afraid. So easy now to let myself be dragged down. I could scarcely remember what I'd been doing. Something about pirates. I felt my right hand slide across something. The radiator pipe. My senses flooded back to me. I put the pipe in a white-knuckled grip with my right hand, with my vice grip still on my wrist. Moving my left was agony, but I still managed to find and grab what felt like an arm. I pulled with all my might and felt a weight moving towards me slowly, picking up speed as I pulled harder. The blue flashes turned to red, and the whisper stopped sounding joyful. The waves turned to roaring flames, and the laughter grew cruel, pounding in the back of my head like hammer blows. I felt the skin on my wrist begin to tear as the grip on it grew impossibly tighter. I tried to scream, but the pounding was so loud that I don't know if I did. Something shifted. Some cord holding the weight back snapped, and whatever I was pulling flew past me as I nearly smacked myself in the face with my newly freed left arm. The flashes stopped, and I heard one last whisper as I opened my eyes. Ed's voice. Sorry. I had no idea what I had expected to see when I woke up, but I was still disappointed. The room was still empty and quiet. I was lying on the bed. Except for me slowly getting up, nothing moved. The TV was off and the clock face was dark. I sighed with Jack's face 800 miles away. A power outage was significantly less useful to me. Without the ceiling light, the only illumination was an eerie orange glow filtering through the curtains and illuminating the dust in the air. More dust than I remembered. Much more. How long had I been wherever I was? First thing was first, though. I went to the bathroom and found, much to my relief, that the tap still worked. After a drink from the faucets and a truly legendary piss, I stepped out the door. The light of a setting sun blinded me as I stared across the parking lot, deserted save for my car. Even I had to admit that the pine forests and rolling hills were rather pretty. Less pretty was the fact that I didn't see a single other person, car, or lit window in the entire town. Had it been evacuated? The air smelled vaguely of smoke, but I could see no impending wildfire. I walked to my car and headed for the road back to the interstate. I still couldn't believe that no one had bothered to check the motel or notice my car. Then again, I still wasn't sure what had happened for most of a day at least. If the sun was setting again, evacuating a town, even a tiny shithole like this one, had to take longer than that. I added kill Ed to my to-do list right after. Leave without encountering the reason the town is empty. Drugging me and leaving me to maybe literally die in a fire was a new low even for him. It must have been drugs, right? No other explanation. The sun finished setting as I drove back east through the forest, my headlights now the only illumination on the road. There was still no sign of a fire, not even a glow above the trees. I should have felt relieved, safe even. I had plenty of gas to get back to the highway, but there was still something off. I hadn't seen anyone or anything on the road. No fire trucks, no evacuation route, signs, not even a speed limit sign. The road had been totally empty. I would never describe myself as much of a social person, but I would have killed to see some sign of life right now. I turned the radio on, but even the AM channels were playing nothing but static. I was so lost to my own worries that I almost pissed my pants when the radio came to life again with the same Jesus crap as before. The dash clock read 10:14 p.m. Shouldn't this old asshole be in bed by now? And as we wrap things up for tonight, we've got time for one more call. Listeners, please open your hearts for... An ear-splitting blast of static came from the radio, accompanied by a throb in my head. The same feeling from the motel room. My fingers scrambled as I spun the volume knob down, but the broadcast did not go quiet. As I frantically switched my gaze back and forth between the road and the radio, flashes of orange appeared in the trees, keeping pace with my car and disappearing when I tried to get a better look. The grandfatherly voice of the preacher came back, chuckling like he had just heard an old joke. As our caller has gently reminded us, we collect more than just donations at this station. Now I know I like to go on and on about redemption, about how all sins can be paid in fire. But it is all too often that we forget there is a line across which no soul may travel and still hope to see paradise. The voice became deathly quiet. I listened with growing unease. A line across which the Lord of Ash claims all. My faithful, our caller has informed us that someone has paid the ultimate price tonight to try and escape our Lord's justice, and that payment does not yet realize he is in our Lord's realm. The voice became a bit more cheerful, chuckling again. My faithful, our payment is heading east through the forest, and I think we should give him a warm welcome. The radio went dead again. I checked my mirrors. Nothing. I accelerated away. I didn't like the sound of being a payment, especially for the creepy old fart. That's how it worked in horror movies, right? The country preacher running some kind of sex dungeon out of the church basement. Yeah, no thanks. I tore around a bend, drifting into the other lane and feeling the tires nearly lose their grip on the roadway. I forced myself to take a deep breath and let off the gas as I finally hit a straight section of pavement. In the distance, just at the edge of the headlight's reach, someone was standing in the center of the road. As I approached, slowing reflexively, I realized that the figure was charcoal black, even in the lights. My head started to throb again. I couldn't have been more than a few hundred feet away. Almost stopped when the figure began sprinting towards me. I could see its face by the time I was able to stop. Then it flung itself onto the hood. It was human. At least it had been. Horrifically burned skin. Little more than black flakes held together by some unnatural force, with boiling pus oozing and hissing through the gaps. Empty caverns where eyes should have been. A glowing orange maw behind perfect white teeth. The entire car jolted as I slammed it into reverse. Two hands leaving bubbling paint and scorch marks on the hood as I accelerated out of the creature's grasp. It ran after me, far faster than a person should have been able to run, barely slower than the car. This is the part where an action hero would pull a J-turn and say something cool. I didn't know how to do either of those things, so I reversed down the road for a half mile until the creature was just out of sight and I found a gravel pullout to turn around in. Fortunately, no more burnt sprinters tried to hitch a ride. I headed back towards town, keeping my speed down on the curves and my head on a swivel. The rational part of my brain told me to go back to town and try a different road. The irrational part told me that probably wouldn't work. Whatever rules the universe followed had gone to la-la, and along with that dude's eyeballs. For lack of other options, I continued westwards. After another 4 miles, an orange glow began to creep onto the horizon in front of me. A telltale sign of a wildfire. Fucking hell. Now of all times? With no creature in sight, I pulled over and took stock of my options. Forward or back. Town or forest. Possible death by monster or possible death by fire. Not a great set of options. With a boom, the roof of the car caved in. 2 footprints pressed into it. The temperature skyrocketed as I floored the gas pedal, struggling to see with the roof now pressing into my shoulder. The acceleration failed to remove the monster from the roof. Instead, there was a horrible screech as a black claw tore through the metal and grazed my shoulder. My shirt smoldered. I felt my skin cook under it. Another hand reached in and began to tear the hole wider. The radio came to life again as I struggled to stay on the road. You have sinned. You will burn. The Lord of Ash will... I put my fist through the front of the radio, surprised at my own strength and anger. Fuck the Lord of Ash, whoever he is. Up ahead, a branch hung low over the road's shoulder. As a boiling hand grasped for my face, I passed under it. With a howl, the creature left the top of my car, the tree igniting behind me. I saw more orange flashes, the creature's mouths, through the trees. They were making no effort to hide, trying to keep pace with the car. Speed was my only defense left. As I left the trees and re-entered the fields around the town, I saw the orange glow of the spreading fire crest the trees in my mirrors. No going back that way. I tore back into town with my gas gauge hovering on empty. The creatures were all around now, watching from the windows of the empty shops and sprinting across the rooftops. They had the numbers to jump on the ruined roof and drag me out, but they didn't. The wildfire would finish the job. The flames were the height of mountains now, surrounding the town completely and blotting out the stars with smoke. I had one plan left, and it was a long shot. As I tore back into the motel parking lot and jumped out of the car, I noted the time on the dash clock. 12:36 a.m. Double-checking Ed's note from my pocket, I ran upstairs and threw open the door of room 222. I almost cried with relief. There was a blue glow on the bed. I dove for it and felt a hand. I grabbed that hand harder than anything I'd ever grabbed in my life, digging in with my nails as it tried to pull away. The temperature of the roof skyrocketed as one of the burned men appeared on the doorway behind me. Its already mutilated face twisted into a snarl. As my feet singed under a blackened hand, I closed my eyes and pulled even harder. The hand let go of my leg as I rose through a sea of red, then blue, then onto the bed of room 222. Her name was Sarah. Her driver's license said she was 27, and her still running laptop said she had a husband and was staying in room 222 of the Last Chance Inn while on the way to visit her parents. I thought about calling the husband, but I decided against it. What the hell would I even say? Hi, I'm Michael. Sorry I sent your wife to hell. Maybe you can get a new one. No, the police would probably do a more tactful job. Who knows? Maybe she'll figure it out too and pull in some other guests so she can escape. Or maybe not. The front desk lady was a bit concerned about my burn marks and painful limp, but she also handed me an envelope. I told her I had been in a grilling accident before I left. She seemed to buy it. The envelope just read, "Mike, open immediately" on the outside. I wanted to sit in my car to read it, but my car was gone from the parking lot. Maybe it was still in hell. I opened the envelope, and a set of BMW keys and a thick stack of $100 bills fell out, with a note visible still inside. That was when I noticed the brand new X6 in the parking lot. I sighed and loaded my luggage. Let it never be said that Ed didn't pay well. I drove out of town before I could get tangled in any missing persons cases. Ed had given me plenty of experience in dealing with legal trouble. Massive pain in the ass. Not like they were gonna get that lady back anyways. Sitting in my new heated seat at a rest stop, I read the note. Michael, congratulations. If you are reading this, then you are the second living proof that intra-planar travel is possible for a human. I hope that Lord of Ash's theatrics didn't scare you too badly. He's more or less at the absolute minimum level of power a demon needs to get their own realm, but he likes to act like, for lack of a better term, a big swinging dick. To make sure to follow up with him, if he asked, regarding whatever/whoever you paid to get back out, He was extremely displeased with how long you took to get there and let me out. If he didn't heal whatever burns you got from his associates, I've got some ointment you can use. If you'd like to continue helping me with the research, my new sponsor is prepared to pay you $300K a year and full health benefits. The car is yours. I told Jack, at the accounting firm that you died in a car crash and had to make it look realistic. So I borrowed your old one. Side note, avoid I-84 for a bit. There was a big wreck. Hopefully that makes it easier to ditch the office job. Head south from Dayton, WA, on Touche Road until you see a sign for George's Towning Service Yard. Turn left there, and follow the dirt track for about 20 miles and I'll find you. Ed. On one hand, I wasn't a big fan of the fact that Ed had been presumptuous enough to fake my death. On the other hand, I wasn't actually dead, and that was 6 times my current salary. Also, heated seats. I turned the radio back to the religious station and pulled back onto the road. My friend Astrid was the most beautiful soul I have ever met. She was the kind of person who would do anything for her friends, and when she was with a person, she was 100% invested in them, their story, their life. When she asked how someone was feeling, she genuinely meant it. She was the friend who made me want to be the best version of myself. A friend I would do anything for, even if it meant leaving my comfort zone far behind. That's why when she led me down a narrow path in the remote Michigan wilderness along the vast Lake Superior, I followed her unquestioningly. I didn't remember exactly how we got there or what came before. All I could think of were my immediate surroundings. The lapping of the waves against the distant shore, the cry of the gulls circling for fish, the slight chill of the August air as it weaved through the towering pines promising an early autumn this year, but the warmth of the sun against my skin letting the air know summer wasn't quite done playing. Most importantly out of all those things, I saw my beautiful companion, my best friend in the whole world, walking ahead of me, talking and laughing. There was no place else I would rather be. My heart was full. I followed her without question, not knowing or even caring where we came from, where we were going, or hell, even what time of day it was. It was usually a meticulous planner, but the details I would fret over before a trip simply did not matter. I couldn't help but notice how lovely she looked. I mean, she was always radiant, but this time she was simply ethereal, unnaturally almost. Her wavy brown hair fell gracefully to her lower back, emitting a soft glow I assumed was from the sun. She was in her best hiking outfit, REI pants, keen boots, and an LL Bean wicking shirt. She even wore the bright red scarf I made her for Christmas this past year. I noticed her boots made no sound as she walked, making her look as if she were floating. A fairy princess leading me into the mystical forest. I laughed aloud at the thought, the sound stopping her abruptly. She turned to face me with a questioning look. "Where are you taking me, dear?" I asked. She pressed her finger to her lips, urging me to be silent, then pointed ahead of us where the trail broke through the trees, leading to a cliff overlook. I walked ahead, and as I got closer to the cliff, the blissful feeling I had throughout our journey turned to a bitter coldness within my heart. I stopped just shy of the cliff, not wanting to go any further. For some reason, I was afraid to look over the edge. I felt something ice cold on my shoulder. It was her hand. She squeezed reassuringly, urging me to go forth. When I got to the edge, I felt a gust of cool air whip my face. As I squinted my eyes for a better look, a flash of bright red appeared in the lower edge of my vision. My heart was pounding. I looked down and there it was. The scarf I made Astrid for Christmas last year. The one she was just wearing, but how? I turned around and she was nowhere in sight. I stepped back into the woods. The path we walked turned out to be more of a makeshift footpath or deer path. I frantically tried to retrace my steps. I didn't get too far when I saw a group of individuals in neon vests walking side by side. It looked as if they were combing the forest. I looked down at my own clothes to find I was always wearing a similar vest. As if a spell were broken, I realized I was here out in the woods. Astrid had gone missing last week after a solo hiking trip. I managed to tell the police where her scarf was. Sure enough, her body was found in the lake shortly after a boat was dispatched to the bottom of the cliff. The most wonderful day in my life spent with my favorite person ended with me losing her forever. It had been almost 2 months since Astrid's body was drawn from Lake Superior. The results from the autopsy came in. Nothing suspicious showed up. She died from the impact of hitting the water. The lead investigator told us it was impossible to determine if the fall was an accident or on purpose, but assured us there was no sign of struggle, no DNA on her person, nothing to suggest anyone harmed her. I suppose that means I should take comfort in the fact that my best friend was either being reckless and fell, which I highly doubt, or that she was in so much emotional turmoil that she didn't want to live anymore. The thought of her doing that was unfathomable. She never once mentioned anything about being depressed. She never showed any sign of being sad. However, the possibility left me with a nagging feeling. Maybe there's something I missed. Maybe she was showing signs and I was too dense to notice. I'm a terrible friend. I dreamt about her every night since we found her. Every dream was the same. I saw her walking through the woods and slowly approach the cliff, her eyes glossy and mouth slack as if in a trance. The moment she jumped, her expression went from vacant to terrified as she plummeted toward the lake. I always woke up before she hit the water. I figured the dreams were a part of the grieving process. With so many unanswered questions, my brain tried to fill in the blanks. During the memorial service, I sat next to her parents, Bob and Linda. As the priest delivered the sermon, I felt a sense of deja vu as it was only 5 years ago when I joined Astrid and her parents to say goodbye to her brother, Tyler. He was killed by a drunk driver on his way home from work. He died instantly. After the service, Linda pulled me aside. "There's something I want to give you," she said. My heart dropped as she pulled Astrid's scarf out of her purse. She would have wanted you to have it. Choking back tears, I managed a meek, "Thank you," and wanted nothing more than to go back to my house and cry. Before I could turn away, she added, "There was something else I wanted to give you." She reached back into her purse and pulled out a forest green notebook. Astrid's journal. "Bob and I can't bring ourselves to read it," she said, "but if you find anything off, would you let us know?" I told her I would take it. How could I refuse? It felt like an invasion of Astrid's privacy, but I figured it didn't matter much at this point. That night I flipped through her journal, focusing on her more recent entries. About a week before the disappearance, she mentioned the trail and that she was going to clear her head after a long day at work. Sounds like her, I thought. The following page was far from ordinary. I saw Tyler, today it read. I stared at the words in disbelief. She saw her dead brother on the trail. The same place I saw her on, rather. What I thought was her. I kept reading. "I know it sounds crazy, but I saw him. I couldn't believe it. He didn't say anything at first, but he smiled and gestured for me to follow him. I didn't. He then spoke, saying, 'There's something I want to show you.' I wanted to follow him, but I was scared. Now I'm regretting it. I miss him so much. Maybe it was his ghost trying to say goodbye." As I read her last entry, my heart sank. I'm going back to see what Tyler wants. I finally understood why she went. What I didn't understand was how or why she fell. I know curiosity usually gets people like me killed in horror movies, but armed with the ability to separate reality from fiction, I took my chances and drove to the trailhead. My plan was to retrace my steps to the cliff. I wasn't sure what I was hoping for, but I was desperate for closure. Somehow I believed returning here would accomplish that. When I got to the trailhead, I sent my parents my location and an ETA for my return. Considering all that's been going on, I didn't want to take any chances. It was unreasonably warm for late November. The snow hadn't fallen yet, so I was hopeful I'd be able to spot the turnoff to the cliff. Sure enough, after hiking less than a mile, I found it. I had only taken a few steps off the trail when I heard a faint whisper coming through the trees. At first, I thought it was the wind, but when I listened more closely, I could make out a woman's voice. Is someone else out here? Maybe the police found more evidence. Or maybe a ranger was here setting up a blockade so no one else would get hurt. I decided to check it out and wound up in the middle of a clearing with a circle of stones. They looked as if they were placed there by someone. When I entered the circle, the whisper stopped abruptly. In fact, all sounds seemed to stop abruptly. The forest was completely silent. I noticed each rock had an odd symbol etched into it. It wasn't anything I recognized before. The symbol was an upside-down triangle with an X through the middle and a V underneath. I took some pictures on my phone to bring back and see if anyone knew what they were. I don't know why, but there was something about it that made me feel uneasy, and that I needed to get far away from there. I had just turned the way I came when I heard my name loud and clear. I froze. It sounded like Astrid's voice, but there was something off about it, like it was warped somehow. I refused to turn around. I didn't want to see who or what was behind me. Follow me, it said. I couldn't speak. My tongue felt like iron. I managed to shake my head instead. Follow me, it repeated, this time with a hint of annoyance as if warning me not to refuse again. There's something I want to show you. A sudden realization came over me. Those were the same words Tyler spoke to Astrid. Adrenaline took over and I sprinted down the trail like a scared deer. I could hear twigs snapping behind me as I ran. I was being pursued. It spoke to me again and I started to feel dizzy. I couldn't understand what it was saying. It sounded like a different language. I managed to get to my car after what seemed like an eternity. I threw myself in, locked the doors, and sped down the road. I couldn't see anything coming after me. I didn't stop until I got home. When I pulled up to my garage, I scrolled through the pictures. Black screen. All of them. I then pulled out Astrid's scarf and held it in my hands and sobbed. It wasn't an accident. It wasn't her depression. There's something in those woods, and it took her away from me. It's been almost 2 months, and I haven't been able to sleep through the night. Every time I close my eyes, I see the symbols on the rocks. Every time I let myself drift to sleep, I hear that voice in my head repeating, "There's something I want to show you."